Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for being here, I appreciate it. This week I'm working on a very fun 3-color puddle pour, beginning with some alizarin crimson and light blue violet, along with some primary cyan, also known as blue. So let's get going and we'll see how it turns out. Okay, now as I get into some puddles here, just want to ask how everyone's week has gone. How have your pours turned out? Anything special or that sticks out in your memory as a memorable pour? If so, which technique did you use and which colors? I'm curious to know what you guys made this week and how it turned out. And now as for me, I have a goal this year to be at least 2 to 3 weeks ahead of myself in terms of videos and pours for my channel. I tend to be behind oftentimes, which is a bit aggravating because you'd like to be at least 2 pours ahead of the game in terms of timeline. As far as I'm concerned, that's my goal for this year, 2024. And what are you guys' goals? Anything going on personally if you want to share with me down in the comments, or I guess for pouring sake as well? If so, let me know. Now, as for this puddle pour, this is the first time I've used the primary cyan blue for any of my pours. So I found that this color, with this mix of Floetrol and a little bit of water, turned out really great because it's a very bright color. So I'll get to more of that blue in a second, but here is my second favorite color of this pour is my light blue violet, which complements the darker blue quite well and gives off a nice light contrast in terms of the 2 colors prior to my crimson. Now as for the light blue violet and the crimson, they're both by Liquitex, and the cyan primary blue is by Amsterdam, which are really complementary type acrylics which work really well. I found Liquitex is a bit more smooth coming out of the bottle compared to Amsterdam, which is a bit more thick and takes a bit more medium or water to thin out. But as far as I'm concerned, Liquitex is a very good brand to work with, in my opinion, for all mediums with some water. This worked out quite well for the sake of my pours and consistency. I used a bit more water than typical, which is not normal for me, but I found that I couldn't get the consistency to be any more thin without adding more water. So I'm leaning into using more water more often. So that is a learning opportunity for me to pass on to you guys. Now I feel like my dislike for using water in any of my pours is due to the fact that when I first began to pour, again, this is a couple years back already, so I've learned some things since then, that a lot of my craft paints I used initially do not react well to water. And a lot of them cracked early on, especially when they were beginning to be varnished. And it was very discouraging. I couldn't figure out why. I was very introductory in terms of knowing anything and how acrylic pouring worked, what types of paints worked, what binders were, what pouring medium was. So my aversion to water, I think, stemmed from the fact that a lot of my first pours initially were always cracking. And so what are you guys' thoughts on using water mixing with paint compared to pouring medium? I'm very curious. Let me know. All right, now wrapping up these puddles, here is about exactly where I thought I turned these really nice puddles into a big old dumpster fire. I thought that this blend looked hideous because my crimson, although I had different ideas for it in terms of being a nice complement to the blues, just turned into a big murky mess, and I had no idea what to do with myself or how to fix it other than to maybe try to spread more blue across the crimson in hopes of getting this murk off my canvas, because I was quite discouraged over how it looked altogether. Now looking back on this video, I know that blue and crimson or red should make a nice pretty violet / purple. This was for sure not that. This was just ready to be turfed in the garbage. I was so unhappy. However, leading into this next frame, I decided, hey, I've got more cyan, pretty primary blue off to the side. I'm going to cover some of it and get rid of some of that yucky murkiness that I made with my crimson, which was just a gorgeous color, but really just made a bit of just too much mess for me. And I wanted some color in this pour, so the crimson ultimately turns into a bit of a complementary color in the end. And here we go with my titanium white cell activator leading into my swipes. All right, and here we are with the end result of the puddles slash extra blue thrown on top. But this is where things really turn the corner. I used a lot more titanium white paint for my cell activator this week, like a lot more, wanting my cells and lacing to pop out as crisp and as bright as possible. And I believe this recipe is the best cell reactive recipe I've ever made. This lacing was gorgeous. It spread across the entire canvas. It didn't deviate. Nothing sunk to the bottom. And as it just takes its time to sprout on out, it looks really, really pretty. And I couldn't have been more happy with that first swipe. Alright, now I realized right about here that I inadvertently put myself in a position where I had to swipe my next and last swipe across the first lacing row. And I don't like to cross my lacing because I prefer to have every swipe be independent of itself and show off the pretty colors and lacing and effects that it can on their own. But I had no choice but to make a bit of an X, like an X marks the spot kind of thing for an oceanic vibe, which actually turned out really pretty. Okay, now as I leaned into my tilt here, I wanted to be very careful with how quickly I decided to tilt my first corner off the canvas because my paint was quite thick compared to what I would have liked it to be, but ultimately it wound up being not terrible, medium to thin thickness, we'll call it. But there was about 17 to 19 or so ounces on the canvas, which spread a bit more slowly than I like, but again, not to distort or get my lacing out of character, out of whack. I wanted to go a bit more slowly, going around in a bit of a circular motion, just to spread that paint corner to corner before dumping off my first side. And what's funny also about watching this video back is that as many videos as I may have watched or courses I've taken from Molly and Olga and Rinske for how to pour, how pouring works generally, the science behind pouring, I'm learning that I think the fact that I used more paint in this batch of paints for the binders themselves holding that paint together taught me a lot this week, because this paint stuck together. It maintained its consistency, its brightness. It looks great. And I found that although it was a bit of a slow going process for the tilt itself, this painting may be one of the nicest paintings I've made in quite some time. So if you're newer, pay attention to what you learn out the hop initially and do your best to investigate how things can go well and how to make yourself better week over week. And now don't get me wrong, I'm no professional, but the fact I took some time to step back, look at some previous pours to see my wins and losses on how those went is a big deal. If you only look at your good pours and grade yourself by how well those good ones turned out, and don't look at the ones that failed, like my previous 3 or 4 cracks, which just bummed me out to no extent. I was in a bit of a funk where I didn't want to pour for a bit. And having looked at those previous pours, thinking, you know what, happy accidents do happen, and we can embellish, make them beautiful. It's interesting to see how far we can come if you take time to reflect on where you've been to where you've come, because ultimately we learn week over week in doing this as a hobby or as part of your little job, if you call it that. This is a learning in progress situation at all times. So keep going. You guys are great, and whatever you make will be beautiful. getting through this last section of my tilts turned out real well. Looking down on this painting now compared to the murkiness we were staring at about the 4-minute mark, I think this is leaps and bounds better than where we were. So I was quite happy to get this far on this pour. I wasn't sure how things would turn out altogether, but I was really happy with how this pour wound out. The crimson surprised me in the sides of the pour, and here we are as a bit of a wet overhead look. This white lacing it's been about 3 days of drying since I poured, sorry, and it's just as crisp and just as white as it was when I first poured it. So I was really happy to see that the colors stuck together, nothing went away. This pour is in my top 5 in the past year for sure. What do you guys think? What do you think of the color combinations I chose? The lacing effects you see down there I think are really pretty. What are your guys' thoughts? Anyway, if you've come this far in the video, thanks for being here. Hit that like button if you did like it, and of course subscribe if you're not there yet. And ultimately, this is what it turned out to be, so I'm quite happy with it and how things turned out. And we will see you again in the next one.